Hello and good afternoon or good morning as the case may be. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar brought to you by Nutanix. Our webinar today is entitled Traditional VDI versus Desktops as a Service. And we'd like to welcome our audience to our event today. And again, thank you for being here. We're going to get some introductions and housekeeping items out of the way before I turn the presentation over to today's presenter. First of all, our presenter is Jonathan Eugenio, who is a Principal Solutions Architect in Nutanix. Jonathan, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Scott.
My name is Scott Lowe. I am with Actual Tech Media, and I'll be moderating today's event. And before we get started, there's a few things we need to talk about. First of all, questions. You have questions, we have answers. And we want to know what your most burning questions are around virtual desktop infrastructure and desktops as a service. What are they? How do they work? Why is it so awesome? What's not so awesome? We want you to leave this event having your questions fully answered so you can make an informed decision. If you happen to have that killer question that you just know we're going to be able to answer, there is the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please open it up, type your question in, and hit send. We will be taking questions throughout the event, and the more questions you ask, the better. And I really mean that. Ask questions. Today's prize is a $300 Tango gift card. We'll be giving that card away to one lucky attendee at the end of today's event. And we also have a handout. If you open the handouts pane in the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a handout. It's a handy PDF you can download. It's a definitive guide for what desktop as a service really is and why it can be better than, in some cases, VDI, but it's not always a replacement necessarily. But how VDI and DaaS compare to one another. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to take you through his presentation around desktop as a service. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you very much, Scott. Good afternoon and good morning, or wherever you might be. Greetings to you. And I'm Jonathan Eugenio from Nutanix Frame. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about traditional VDI versus desktops as a service. And again, as Scott said, if you have any kinds of questions that come up during the course of the presentation, as well as during the demonstration. Yes, there will be a demonstration as well. Please feel free to look inside the GoToWebinar chat window on the far right-hand side, and please go ahead and post your questions. So let's go and get started. So a little bit about myself. I have been in IT for the last 20 years. I have started out in actually the Unix world. And started doing a little thing called end-user computing. At that point, we called it server-based computing. And I focus primarily here over at Nutanix Frame with a lot of the enterprise applications. I have a huge background with, of course, just like a lot of you folks, Citrix, Microsoft, VMware, as well as cloud technologies. So part of the things that we'll be talking about today will be cloud infrastructure as a service, desktops as a service, a little bit of software as a service, and how those all culminate together. A little bit about myself. I also, I'm a classic car guy, so I like things from all the way from horses, carriages, all the way to your normal hot rod. Love that. And I'm also into a lot of analog stuff. So if it's any kind of technology, whether new or old, I really do like that. So if you happen to be one of those folks that likes Twitter, follow me on Twitter at @JohnEugenio. So a couple of things. So traditional VDI, let's go ahead and define that real quick. So we take a look at the market, and we've heard over the last couple of years, things like desktops as a service, software as a service, virtual desktops, and then there are things like remote apps and Windows Virtual Desktop, and then you've got this whole entire list of things that people are having to give you information on, and you're trying to figure out, okay, I have been doing a little bit of application virtualization. I've got those older applications that will not die, those applications that have been in your environment for the last 15, 20 years that nobody quite knows how to install. And then somebody is usually happy to support it, or they're not happy to support it. And so sometimes you have use cases like a contractor use case, or you have a scenario where you have developers that need to be able to get in remotely, and you have those contingent workers that you want to provide a desktop, but you're having to do it on-prem. You're having to use a a typical hypervisor like a VMware, or let's say you're using KVM, or let's say you're using Citrix Zen Server, or even Nutanix AHV. Well, a lot of those technologies are on-prem, but if you've been doing that for the last couple of years, some of you are actually taking a look at, what am I going to do in the cloud? What do I do with this cloud thing? A lot of people have said, okay, well, a lot of my applications that run on traditional desktops, whether they be traditional desktop or virtual desktop in something like Citrix Zen Desktop or Citrix Desktops or VMware Horizon View or any other solution out there, you're having to deal with back-end resources like databases and file servers and license servers that you need to be able to get to, and then sometimes there are interoperability issues. So when you take a look at the culmination of traditional VDI, it's not just, hey, I'm going to plop in a desktop and there it is. It's everything surrounding it as well. And so it's a lot to go ahead and think about. The biggest problem when you're going down the road of a traditional VDI journey, what ends up happening? So we've got a familiar coyote there, right? And he's got his whole plan and he's thinking about it. Okay, he's wily admin on the left-hand side and he thinks, okay, well, I have to think about the storage. I have to think about buying licenses, my VDI licenses, my Microsoft licenses. I have to think about the infrastructure behind it. Do I have to hire consultants? It tends to be a little bit overwhelming. And then you have all of these huge ideas about what you want to do, and then you find yourself in an abyss. So that's really where we've seen traditional VDI, and I was part of that journey for a lot of customers around the world where they looked and they said, okay, I want to do this. I know I need to be able to do this for certain use cases, but the question is, where do I start? How do I start? What are those types of scenarios that would be good for VDI, or do I look at this cloud thing? Okay, so there was somebody that once said there's no real easy way to provide high performance desktops, or I'll even say applications from the cloud. And so you've got, what do you have out in the market today? You have things like legacy VDI, and you've got application remoting solutions that are often cumbersome. They're a little bit slow. Sometimes they get bloated. They don't start out that way, mind you. In my personal history in doing VDI, these solutions often don't start that way, but due to a comedy of errors, due to situations that change, they become expensive, they become slow, they become bloated, and they're not necessarily built for the cloud. And we'll actually talk a little bit about what that means when you're trying to build something for the cloud, when you traditionally had something on-prem, because you have to think about how I can present a user a resource, but how the heck do I get them to the resources that are on-prem, okay? So we figured it really should be simple. There was an industry, there was an actual industry quote where they said, okay, well, whether it be desktop as a service or remote app, it should be simple. It should perform just as well as if I installed it here on my PC or on my Mac, and it needs to be cost effective, okay? It also needs to have the ability to, when I'm thinking about my costs, I also want to start thinking about things like, all right, what is the entry cost in for a desktop as a service or VDI or any of those virtualization solutions? What is the entry cost, and then what will my incremental costs be over time, okay? And so that leads us to Scott again, and poll question number one. So Scott, would you like to go ahead and put up poll question number one?
I would. And our poll question is going to be asking our audience today around what your use cases are for migrating to the public cloud. So you can answer as many of those as you like. And while you're looking at that question, we are going to ask a couple of questions of our guests today. First of all, how does the Nutanix VDI solution, particularly as I framed, compare to Citrix and VMware in regard to network consumption?
Oh, okay. So I get this question a lot. And so it's really segmented into two pieces. Number one, it's the display protocol. And number two, it's the what about my backend network resources? So there isn't much I could do about the backend network resources because if you're connecting into a CIF share, well, can't change the law of physics. So it'll be the same connecting in database server or license server. But if you take a look at Citrix, so ICA HDX, and you have a Horizon View, you've got PC over IP, you've got RDP, insert protocol here, and then you've got frame remoting protocol. Frame remoting protocol will grow and shrink upon itself based upon the content that's on the screen. So right now, you're looking at the quick poll in front of you, okay? And if the quick poll, if I'm in a session and the quick poll is not actually moving or not actually changing, Frame will actually lock the session, that portion of the session, into a static state, and thereby I'm not consuming as much bandwidth. So I might be at a bit rate of 1, and you'll actually see this inside of the demonstration. So I can be anywhere. So if I'm doing lower performance, I can be per user about anywhere around a meg. If I'm doing video up to 2160p, which might I add, we can go ahead and do. Or if I am doing things like 3D, I'll be anywhere and I'll float because it's dynamic. I'll float anywhere in between 3 meg to 5 meg per user, but it really just depends on what is happening on the screen. So for Frame, okay, so when you take a look at ICA, you're just you're consuming what delta changes there are. With Frame, we're not actually going to go ahead and repaint the screen, and we're going to go into heartbeat mode, so you're actually consuming less. Scott, how are we looking for that quick poll?
Pretty good. So you want to take one other question before we keep going?
Sure, please.
What is the Nutanix Frame approach to persistence? I'm assuming they're talking about persistent desktops versus non-persistent desktops.
Yeah, so really, actually, we'll take it a step further. So the question was around persistence, right? There are two forms of persistence, really. Number one, you've got operating system persistence because you have a persistent desktop and a non-persistent desktop. For those of you that are new to VDI, your non-persistent desktop, I log in, I make some changes, I log out, they're gone, okay? Persistent operating system is a scenario where that desktop is mine. I want to install an application, and I want to be able to come back, okay? In Frame, we actually do, and this is something that some of my colleagues think that we don't have, but we do have the ability to do persistent desktops and non-persistent desktops from an operating system standpoint. So Frame can indeed do that, and that is something that customers really started asking us to do. We had a mode like that in the classic Frame product, but we found that there weren't a lot of people using it. So we actually brought it back into this recent version of Frame. But I said that there were two ways of doing persistence, and the other one was profile persistence. So the way we do profile persistence, I change a macro in Excel. I actually change a picture of Grammy and the kids on the desktop. Those types of scenarios are profile persistence. It's not just app data, it's also the essence of the user profile. So we have two ways to do profile persistence. One's just app data. If you just said, hey, I'm just going to be doing applications and I want to make sure that those changes persist from session to session. But we also have another solution coming that also allows for me to be able to use a disk for the entire user profile. So let's say %username%, and then the username would actually be inside of a disk. So that's how we handle persistent profiles as well as persistent operating systems. Scott, was there one more, or did you want to keep on going?
We'll keep going. So if we take a look at our poll results today, as we look at why people looking at public cloud, desktop and VDI is actually up there. So that's
okay. Right on.
That's pretty impressive, and that's good news for obviously Frame as well.
Well, so what's great about that, and so for you folks, thank you, by the way, for actually answering the polls. I know when I'm doing a poll and I select a couple of items, I often sometimes personally go back and I change my answer towards the one that's most important to me. So for those of you that are doing desktops, yes, we can provide desktops from multiple cloud regions, whether it be AWS, Azure, or Xi. But for those of you that are doing application or wanting to do application-specific workloads, absolutely, we can do that in Frame. So there's a mixed mode, and we can switch in between the two. So, okay, so let's go ahead and go on with our presentation. So on the left-hand side, what do I have? I have public cloud, and on the right-hand side, I have on-prem. So we'll go ahead and talk about public cloud, defining that first. Frame, and I'm going to say Frame from here since it's a little bit faster. Frame is a desktop as a service, provider that you can indeed provide desktops or application workloads on any infrastructure as a service on the left-hand side. Now that can be consumed either on our subscription or on yours. We want you to be able to use the cloud relationships that you have. So if you come to me saying, John Eugenio, I have AWS, then we'll say, okay, go ahead, dude, bring your own, right? What are the positives and negatives? So when you're taking a look at the public cloud, you're able to scale up as well as scale down with the usage patterns and the workloads. Or some of you might be project-based, and you're wanting to say, okay, I have a project I need for people to consume this SAP GUI application. They're going to be doing a review of all of our bill of materials and everything that we need to from a finance standpoint. That's all that they're going to be doing. So you pay for what you use. You scale up what you want to be able to use at that moment in time. And then 3 months, 3 weeks, 2 days later, you say, hey, Johnny, you know what? Right. We went ahead and provisioned 50 of these desktops out there or 50 of these applications out there, and we're not going to use them anymore. I go, why are you talking to me? You just go and you take that down to 20, or you take that down and you take that down to 5, and our automation will go ahead and shrink it. Why is that important? Because you're able to provision in minutes rather than days or minutes or hours, okay? And what we like to call that is an elastic capacity, okay? When you're taking a look at on-prem VDI, and I'm not saying that on-prem VDI is bad, I'm saying that on-prem VDI has its place inside the marketplace for certain use cases, right? But what are the positives and negatives? The positives are, yes, I do have my workloads on premise on hardware that I've built, but there are other components that in a data center based app or desktop delivery environment that can't go ahead and scale quickly. It's a fixed capacity. And again, what did we say a little bit earlier? What did I say a little bit earlier? You have the scenario where it bloats, it gets slow. Customers, your end users call. When there's a problem, who do they call? They don't call me, they call you. Okay, so I wanted you, when you get these slides, I want you to be able to understand that there is a difference in between what you can indeed do on premise and what you can actually do in public cloud as well. Okay, so I have customers that come to me and they go, okay, I've been doing traditional VDI for insert number of years here or insert number of months here, and it's got me so far. What are my choices? And what Frame brings to the table is that you're able to leverage the cloud, and that cloud being an infrastructure, the service provider that you might, AWS or Azure, that you might already have a relationship with, and you're able to provision very, very quickly. It's secure, it's in your own 4 virtual walls, and you are actually able to pay for that to which you consume rather than having a static workload like a desktop sitting under somebody's desk that's on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We thought about it when we wanted to be able to provide you a solution. So in this scenario, what do you have the ability to do? In the cloud, you have the ability to focus on what? A workspace that you can deliver, whether it be a desktop or an application. And you're focusing on what your requirements, you're focusing on you, you're focusing on your end users. And not only that, but you're using the infrastructure of the service. Maybe you already have a relationship with those aforementioned providers. And Frame actually allows for you to broker those connections, allows for you to use a customized cloud-only display protocol in order for you to be able to also scale up and scale down the workloads that you need, and be able to, on the far right-hand side, be able to go ahead and focus on what the reporting needs are. So For those of you that are new to desktop as a service, you have something that was created, and XiFrame was actually created in 2012. It's not new, but it was created first inside of the cloud, and it was a scenario where it always needed to be internet facing. What else did it need to be? It needed to be able to scale easily. It didn't need a client. We wanted to be able to create an environment by where you said, okay, well, I could buy a broker. I can go ahead and stand up my own. I could stand up infrastructure. That was not the point. The point was to make it so that it was agile and secure and be able to be accessed from any kind of HTML5 browser. But at the same time, your business owners, and maybe you are a business owners want to be able to see what? They want to be able to see, what am I consuming? What am I paying for? Where are the costs coming from? And is it economical for the organization? So we created a set of APIs so that you can do that. And we didn't want to lock it in to one provider. We didn't want to just give you one avenue and say, you must do Azure or you must do AWS. No, not at all, okay? We wanted to make sure that you had the ultimate choice over what you wanted to be able to use, okay? I had a customer last year, they were using Azure, and they said, okay, it's time for us to take a look at also providing workloads, their applications. They were doing application workloads like SAP GUI, some Lotus Notes. I know that there are some other admins going, wow, Lotus Notes. And they wanted to be able to provide it on AWS and Azure. And I said, groovy, let's go ahead and do it. I personally cut them over in about an hour and a half over to AWS. Their end users did not notice, okay? And as far as they were concerned, all they saw was a web page. That's all that the end users care about. So why would you even consider something like XiFrame? And so Frame was created on the precedent that a traditional VDI environment, or you have often applications that were never meant for the cloud, right? They were never meant for the cloud. And they were fundamentally just absolutely incompatible with creating a hybrid world. Now, we'll define that in a minute, but multi-cloud being AWS, Azure, let's say Nutanix Xi, let's say AHV on-premise. So being able to create a hybrid in between what I can do inside of the cloud, where my workloads are running, or let's say I'm doing something on-premise in my private cloud, and I want to be able to burst up to the cloud. So we can think about that, or in a disaster recovery type situation. So my customers come to me and they say, all right, John, I want it to be fast. I don't want people to call me as much. I want to make sure that I can do, and here's where Frame was a little bit different from your traditional VDI players, okay? We had people come to us and they say, okay, we want to be able to do high graphics, okay? Well, can you define that for us? We want to be able to do video. Okay, can you take it a step further? We want to be able to do 3D. Right, okay, then we'll build it. And so we did. Your software vendors out there like Autodesk and SolidWorks and PTC, they came to us and said, we want to be able to provide these applications. Can you do it for us? And we did. So we created the architecture inside of the cloud. We created the protocol, and we also said if we were going to do it, we're going to do it right. We're going to have it all automated, and it's all going to be not only in the cloud but highly available around the world. And then the last thing, how do users access it? They access it via an HTML5 browser, and you'll see that inside the demonstration. So Ruben Pruett, who is a thought leader in the end user computing space, he and I now work with each other over at Nutanix, and he and I also, in a roundabout way, worked with each other over at Citrix, as well as he was over at Atlantis. He and I agreed on one thing, that DaaS would provide the same types of traditional VDI without all of the complexity. So as somebody that is keyboard facing, I don't just do webinars, I also get on the keyboard as well. I think about what the upfront costs are, but I also think about all the times that I spend inside of a data center having to migrate applications and infrastructure and storage and insert project here, okay? So when I came over to Frame, I came with the idea that I wanted to make it simpler for my customers and have those same benefits that they may have had on-prem, or be able to go ahead and take it a step further with them and help them provide some of the things that I couldn't provide for them before. So we did the high graphics use case, and then we said, okay, well, that's cool. We're going to go ahead and now do the productivity use case, because the two, while they don't necessarily go hand in hand, we tackled the hardest things first so that you wouldn't have to. Okay, so who's the biggest competitor? I get that question a lot. And it really isn't one versus the other. It isn't on-prem traditional VDI versus desktop as a service. It's a, hey, dude, I want to buy a PC. It's the, hey, I want to make all my applications mobile. Hey, I want to use software as a service. But there are a lot of applications and there are a lot of resources. We'll just call them resources and lump them all together. There are a lot of resources that were never meant to go to the cloud. They were never meant to be virtualized. Heck, they were probably not even meant to go past 10 years. But the truth of the matter is, as technologists, we have to deal with all of these, all of these issues and all of these questions every day. Okay, so from a 10,000-foot view, I can provide a digital workspace from any kind of application. You'll see that there is a mix in between productivity applications and creative and 3D applications. So what else? I wanted you as a customer to be able to say, all right, hey, I've got Ping Identity, or I've got Azure AD. I need to be able to snap that in. My users are already familiar with it. I need for them to be able to use the authentication that they already use. I need them to be able to use the Google Drive that they've already been using. I need for them to, I have a contractor that's coming in and they're using Dropbox. And so these are all types of things, including traditional on-premise SIFT shares or NFS shares. You never know, it happens. When you bring your own storage, your own identity, we said, okay, if we're going to do this, we got to do this right. We want you to be able to use, you have the choice. It's your choice. You either use our infrastructure and, or if you say, John, we've been doing Azure for 3 years, can we use ours? I'll tell you, yeah, you can totally do that. And you don't need any kind of client. It's all accessible from an HTML5 browser. So where does it start? So I have my applications, I have my applications, I pick my infrastructure, and want to be able to integrate what I have. So we talked a little bit about that. It's all your choice. You can integrate and customize anything that you want with very little, a very little situation where you're having to go ahead and do any kind of customizations, okay? And then at the end of the day, either A, you present them a button on their IDP. B, you send them an email saying, hey, want to invite you in Frame. This is your use case. The use case would be, let's say somebody's a remote worker and somebody wants to be able to get into a desktop. They get an email, they click on it, they're in, okay? And they integrate how you want them to, and they go to where you want them to go, okay? So at this point, you're looking at it and you're going, dude, where is the demo? We're at the bottom of the hour. Well, let's go ahead and go to the demo. While I'm doing that and I'm context switching, Scott, were there any questions in queue?
Yes, we do have some questions.
Okay. Let's take a couple.
So one of the questions is, what is the Nutanix Frame approach to layering of applications?
Okay, so we'll extend that not just to layering, but we'll also extend that also to packaging, because a lot of people have done over the last couple of years, or more than the last couple of years, packaging. So if customers using a layering technology, let's take Liquidware FlexSet, okay? And let's say that I have all of my applications, for lack of a better term, we'll say all of these applications have been sequenced or packaged, and I want to be able to use them. So we create a single master image. We call it a sandbox, and you can indeed, A, you can domain join the machine. B, you can push your own GPUs. C, you can push your own agents, and in that type of scenario, yeah, On the sandbox, before you publish, because we're a little bit different, you can install your applications by hand, or you can push the packages, or you can actually put layering on top. Now, I go back and forth about whether layering is needed, but where I've come to the answer for what my customers have been doing is that layering is great for certain use case scenarios for applications that absolutely positively will not jive with each other. They don't work well with each other. So in that type of scenario, they're kind of forced into a corner. You need to do that. So yeah, we can indeed do layering on top of an operating system. It's just an operating system, folks. Okay, so you start off with that default image. You're able to go ahead and layer on top of that, and packages as well. Then for us, you hit the publish button. It asks you, hey, John, right, I see that you want to, in AWS parlance, publish to a T2 medium, and you have some GPU applications that happen to be available as well. Would you like to be able to do a G22X large or a G3S? And it says, well, how many of these do you want? So the point is, you can and do what you would normally do on top of an operating system. Of course, you have to have a network connection back to wherever those sources happen to be, or you can have a VNet or VPC peer to a pre-existing resource in the cloud, or, again, choice, or you can actually have those packages sitting on a utility server within the Frame account. So that actually, yeah, go ahead.
We have another question.
Sure.
What thin client devices work best with Frame?
Okay, that's a good question. So I personally have been doing a lot of testing lately. So the general idea is that anything with an HTML5 browser and a network connection will be a good thin client. Now, does that preclude zero clients? Yes, it does preclude zero clients. Why? Because there is not, as of yet, hint, a native way of delivering a Frame client into a zero client scenario. So if it is a Windows or a Linux thin client, like let's say it's an iGel or a 10Zig or even we've even seen people try and use Raspberry Pis as long as it has a browser and is able to do the encode decode that you would normally, like if you went to YouTube or Hulu or Netflix, and you were able to go ahead and view a video, you'll be able to view Frame. So there are a lot of thin client vendors out there. So you can go ahead and email me questions to frame-sales@nutanix.com, and I could be a little bit deeper and more clear if you'd like for me to be. But we only have a half an hour. So Scott, any more?
Yeah, there's more questions, but let's move on with the demo, and we'll take some more after that.
Sure, hang on. Okay, so this is Frame. This is, well, really the front-end paint for Frame. This is a Frame launchpad, and but this isn't my only launchpad. But what you didn't see is that how I logged in. So like I said, if you took a look at the slideware a little bit ago, or if you're looking at this recording and you are wondering where and how this came to be, I actually logged in, but I chose, so this is my customer KPF, okay? And KPF came to Frame and they said, hey, you know what, by the way, folks are using Office 365 to log in. They're using Office apps. They're already used to what? They're already used to their 365 login. Can we have that be the front door into Frame? Before they got into the Launchpad, we needed to be able to authenticate them, okay? And so could they have put an ELB in front of this? Yeah, they could have done that. But they had a scenario where customers, their end users wanted to be presented with a map and actually click where they needed to be able to go. So if I click here, you'll notice that it is indeed a SAML request. I'm not going to go too geek on you. But basically what we're doing is we're prompting the end user for their credential. We may be prompting them for a second factor of authentication, an app, a YubiKey, what have you. And then eventually that they get into Frame and they get into Launchpad. But here's where it's a little bit different from other DaaS or VDI scenarios that you've seen. look in the bottom right-hand corner with me. So we have a mix of different instances. Are these different machines that I have access to as a user? Yep. What are they? Because they look a little bit architecture to me. So I have Air 4 and Air Gig. John, what does that mean? Well, basically, those are marketing names for non-GPU machines. Let's say for those of you that are familiar with Amazon Web Services, those could be a T2 medium. One could be a T2 medium. The other one could be a T2 large. And keep on looking at the bottom right-hand corner. You also have these Pro 16s and these Pro 64s. Those are GPU-based machines. So here I'm giving the end user the choice to choose which VM type they want. Now this is actually running in AWS, and one of the things that I want you to know is you can give the end user the choice, but remember, we're IT people. There are two things that that end users do. Number one, they dump all their stuff on their desktop, and number two, regardless if they need it or not, they want the fastest machine possible, regardless of how much it's going to cost. So if you said, John, there is no way in heck I want them to have that menu, they get what you give them, okay? You'll notice that I have a plethora of applications here. Some of them are 3D, some of them are productivity applications. So I have a launchpad, and it's a culmination of where you as an administrator wanted me to land, and you could take it a step further and you could say, hey, John, I want you to be on a Pro 16 machine because you're going to be in Google Earth or you're going to be in Revit or anything like that. But if you said, hey, I also want to be able to provide them a desktop, I can provide launch pads. So many different launch pads here. I have a desktop launch pad, and we're going to go into that launch pad. There we go. These launch pads can be from different cloud providers. They can be from AHV on-prem. They could actually be from AWS or Azure. The end user doesn't care at the end of the day where they're getting their stuff, as long as they do what? They can get to their stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and start up a desktop. In full disclosure, there is no client installed on my machine. I'm using an HTML5 browser and a couple of things. I'm in the context of a desktop. But if I was in that, if I needed to be able to access one of the applications that were actually inside of that launchpad, I could have, and I wouldn't see the desktop. I just see the application. Now you've gotten into sessions, you've gotten into virtualized sessions before, I'm sure, and but for those of you that haven't, you can present either a desktop or an application. But what's a little bit different is you have this little doodad at the bottom, and it's called the gear menu. That bar at the bottom, you can choose what you want to give to your end user, whether you want them to have Google Drive. I have Google Drive in the bottom right-hand corner, Dropbox. These are integrations that come by default in Frame, okay? So from here, I can indeed, I can get into the session. I have my gear menu. Because we're in via GoToWebinar, I'm going to click on Show Hide Stats, and I'm actually going to show you what we're doing from a bitrate standpoint. While I'm actually doing the demonstration, I want you to pay attention to the frame rate as well as the bitrate, because what I'm actually doing is I want to be able to show you what's going on the network, even though it might not be refreshing as fast as it would be on my side. The only way you will be able to see if it will be performant for you is for you to be able to test it, and we'll teach you just a little bit how you can do that. So when I get into the session, I check for my available bandwidth. I also check for the available round-trip latency, and I'm checking how far I am from the server. But because it's public cloud, it's not a VM or it's not a machine that's sitting under my desk that's on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What it is, it's the virtual machine that's sitting in, I believe this is Amazon, California. So each time the machine is on, I'm actually consuming some cost, okay? It's infrastructure cost, not frame cost, it's infrastructure cost. So if you needed to be able to have a session elapsed timer and a disconnected timer, I can tell you can go ahead and do that. The end user would be, so this is a demonstration environment. It actually has a max session time of 8 hours. But if you said, John, I only want them in for 20 minutes, that's fine, you can do that. On the far right-hand side, I can go full screen, but you'll notice that I have a couple of other things here, like my Google Drive, my Dropbox, my OneDrive, and my Box. So how we get to user data, okay? How we get to user data is I have my Google Drive here. and it's automatically integrated. I actually logged into this account with my G Suite, and you can actually see my drive there. I do have an operating system drive there, but if you needed for the end user to be able to have Dropbox, Boxer, all four of them, or if you say, absolutely not, we're a very, very secure organization, we don't want to have these, well, then that's your choice. And we'll go ahead and show you that in just a little bit. A couple of other things. Because this is the browser, I can upload files into it. So if you're not going to use a cloud drive, but you have a use case where you have an end user that needs to be able to drag and drop data, you could very well do that, and it would end up in the uploads. If you said, John, I need to be able to do audio. Audio is on by default, but because we're in via GoToWebinar, I've actually disabled the speaker. But let's take a look at a couple things. So I actually have, we'll start with a video. Sure, I never start with the video. So I have YouTube. I have a browser. And again, if you take a look at the frame rate and the bit rate, as I am moving, and we'll just choose one of these videos, okay, you'll notice that I'm getting about 25 frames per second. What Frame is actually doing and paying attention to the decode time at the top, we're using a different encoder specifically for the video. Again, we're doing native HTML5, but you know, anybody can go ahead and show a video, but not everybody. So that's 480p. Let's go ahead and bring that guy up to 2160p, and you'll notice that I am consuming a little bit of bandwidth, but I'm not necessarily consuming a lot. There's my bit rate, there's my latency. If my latency started to be subpar, Frame would actually show me, hey, by the way, John Eugenio, your network is going up and down, things, there's a high level of latency. We're going to give you the choice. We're not going to disconnect you. We're going to tell you, hey, by the way, we know that you want to continue working. How can we help you? Do you want to disconnect and come back later? Do you want to go grayscale? Do you want us to degrade the color depth? We can do that for you now. Or if you say you don't want to give the end user the choice, you can do it dynamically, okay? Why? Because what we're doing in Frame is the ability to have different qualities of service specifically around how we're displaying, what we're displaying, what's going across the pipe. And the minute I go ahead and stop the video, and if I go ahead and take my hand off the mouse, you'll notice that we go into a heartbeat. Okay, so it's 12:42 here on the West. I just want to go ahead and take any kind of questions before I move on. So were there any questions that we see inside the queue, Scott?
Yeah, we do have a few more questions. So
okay.
First one is, does Frame impact Windows 10 licensing?
So that, what I would normally say if I were talking directly to the person is impact how. I need a little more clarity on that.
What they probably mean is, how is Windows 10 need to be licensed to work with inside Frame?
Okay, so really the question should be not necessarily how should it be licensed with inside Frame. It should be how it should be licensed within the cloud, okay? And Windows operating systems, Microsoft always gets a license cost, okay? Matter of fact of life. So if I need my Windows CAL, I can indeed, so let's say on Amazon, I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, a large company in Germany, and they said to me, all right, what we're doing, could we use our KMS? Yeah, you can use your KMS. But if you're on Amazon and you are, and you're using an image that comes from the marketplace, you can use your Windows licenses there. But that's still, if you're going to be virtualizing it via Frame, Microsoft still needs a subscriber access license or a client access license. So really the question really isn't what is it doing to Windows 10 licensing, it's what about the right to use licenses, where it be a subscriber access license from Microsoft or a client access license, because there's always a connection cost and a right to use. What other questions are there?
Can we change how many how many desktops are available after hours versus work hours?
Yes,
it sounds like it's a cost thing.
Yes, so yes, you can. This is one of the things that I really love about Frame. So if I am, and I'm not going to go too deep because we want to be sensitive of your time, but let's say that I am going to be inside of Frame, and I want to do a little bit of capacity management. And there's that Pro 16 machine. I have 10 machines here by default, but none of them are powered on. I can actually say when I'm not having my active capacity from 0650 hours to 1630 hours, Monday to Friday, I could say I want to make sure that there's 1 machine on or 10 machines on. But anything outside of this time spec, absolutely not. I want to shut those machines down so that they're not being used. You can indeed schedule that, and you can go ahead and schedule the backup as well. What other questions are there?
What do you have to offer U.S. government agencies that are looking for a hosting option or for a DaaS option?
Good question. So I would normally refer you over to our Frame government folks, but as they're not on the line, you can indeed, if you're using Azure, you can actually use GovCloud. You can also use Amazon C2S and some of the other FedRAMP compliant environments. And there are a lot of other details, as I'm sure that you're aware of, that if you email frame-sales@nutanix.com, that happens to be at the bottom of the screen, one of the government folks will be able to answer all those questions. But you can indeed do Azure as well as AWS. And if there's an on-prem use case, we can talk about that as well. So go ahead. Go ahead.
So are there plans to allow customers to deploy their own broker and backplane inside their own infrastructure? Before you answer that, we are going to launch our next poll question. So while we're talking about that, go ahead and answer our poll question.
Groovy. Okay. So the poll, you should see the poll in front of you. So the question is, will we indeed have workloads on-prem via AHV on top of Nutanix NX? Yeah, we will. Will it just be the workloads, or will there be any kind of infrastructure? There will indeed be infrastructure. It will be for us to be able to connect into Frame backplane. Okay, so the brokering services are still within the cloud, but the workloads are actually sitting on-prem on Nutanix AHV.
Okay, so if a user needs more compute power for certain tasks and less for others, is that dynamically configurable, or do they have to switch desktops?
So they would need to switch desktops in this scenario. Either that, or the question that I normally ask people is, where do you want to start them? Okay, where are they going to be spending the majority of their time? So you would have to switch in between the different instance types. So regardless if you're AWS or Azure, but let's just use AWS because we're here and inside an AWS environment. Let's say they're in a GT2X large, they're inside of Revit, but yet you want them to also have access to a T2 medium or a T2 large for some other applications. And we'll take it a step further, that are not necessarily in that data center, but in another data center because it's backend that they need to be able to connect to. They would need to be able to launch a desktop from another Frame launchpad, and that other Frame launchpad would be inside of another Frame account. So you would have 2 completely different Frame accounts, or you could go ahead and blend the 2. There are different ways that you could do it. There's no one straight answer for that one. Any other questions, Scott?
Yeah, so there's another one that's interesting here. Is there currently a method for working for offline users that might have laptops that are disconnected and things like that?
I've been wanting to answer this one for about 7 years. So when I was over at Citrix, we tried to go ahead and do this and found that although people wanted to go ahead and do something like that, nobody actually fully went through with it. So with Frame, it's the same exact situation. We do not have an offline mode, nor is there anything for an offline mode in the near future. Okay, so it's not something that's actually in the roadmap, and I don't think that we're going to be doing that. We're going to stay firmly planted inside of the cloud online.
So the last question is, thoughts on using something like this, for example, in a police car with cellular data only?
It
sounds like you may have just answered that in a way.
Well, actually,
if it's not good cellular.
Well, okay, so I worked a project where they were roaming units in a very large Southern California city, where they had a cellular connection or they had the choice of attaching to a wireless hotspot that was actually on the utility pole. So roaming from zone to zone or from precinct to precinct. That type of scenario where they need to be able to connect to an application a la carte, well, either A, on the 101, or B, they're sitting in Crenshaw next to an access point. They would need a network connection, but I personally have been pulled over on the side of the road in Oakland on a cellular connection connecting into a frame environment in Singapore. So yes, that can work.
Excellent. And let's take a look at the results of our last poll question. Cool. It looks like we have some folks that are planning to do something around desktops or apps in the cloud in the relatively near future.
Okay.
With lots more that are setting it out for right now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, either way, if you do indeed have any kind of questions, please feel free to email frame-sales@nutanix.com. And I am one of a load of people that are there to go ahead and answer your questions. So if you would like a demo for yourselves, or you would like to do a test drive, we'll go ahead and talk about how to do a test drive. So let's go ahead and talk about test drive, okay? Because we actually did my demonstration and I recorded it just in case somebody wanted to be able to watch it. So when and if you want the slide where my demonstration is actually embedded into the presentation, should you wish a copy of it. But we do test drives for free. And if you go to nutanix.com/frame, you'll actually see something that looks like this, okay? So don't take my word for it, try it for yourself. You can go ahead and take it for a spin. Now, I will caution you that when you're doing test drive, they're 2 hours only. But if you say, John, dude, that's not enough. If you say, hey, I need a GPU, I'll go, cool, send me an email to frame-sales@nutanix.com, and it'll say, do you have a test drive code? We'll give you a code. It will give you longer than 2 hours, and it will give you a GPU. You just have to email us at frame-sales@nutanix.com, and we'll be more than happy to help. So I encourage you to go ahead and try Frame yourself. And if you have any questions, we're there to help you. And then I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Scott.
And you'll notice on the screen, John has put up a slide for Nutanix's .next conference in Anaheim, California. So if you're in the area or want to be in the area, you should definitely consider attending. And we also have to give away a Tango gift card to a lucky winner. Today's winner is Brenda Lewing. I hope I didn't butcher your name. Brenda, thank you very much for joining today. Thank you to our entire audience for joining us today. John, thank you for this great presentation.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to present to you. Have yourselves a great day and take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.